What's happening, Z-Pack? It's your boy Z-Dog MD. I'm live and direct from the backyard of our rental place in Portola Valley, California, where we are continuing into the last week of our radical sabbatical, where we are doing a series of live broadcasts from the road, from the Z-Dog training grounds near Stanford and the Bay Area, where I lived for a good 25 years, indoctrinated in the ways of the Bay. And now I'm here talking to you. And what I want to talk about today, guys, welcome, by the way. Gosh, the Bay Area is really, really, really beautiful and entirely unaffordable for anybody. Anybody. Even Mark Zuckerberg's probably like, you know what? That mortgage is a hit, guys. It's a hit. And sitting in traffic on the 101, not fun. And unlike in Las Vegas, where we live here, it's pretty packed in tight. So our rental place is right next to another place that I think is rented out. And those neighbors there are cray-cray. So every night until about midnight or 1 p.m., there's loud music. It sounds like a jam band, like Fish or something horrible like that. And it's loud, and they keep all their windows open because we don't have air conditioning here in the Bay. Most people don't anyways, and so it's the natural cooling of leaving the windows open. So we get subjected to the jam bands, people loudly talking. And then this morning, I was awakened to the bestial sounds of the neighbors engaging in the beast with two backs. And it literally sounded like they were killing a raccoon. Like, that's literally what it... I was like, let's call animal control because a raccoon is suffering. But no, it wasn't that. It was something else, which luckily my children didn't ask me about when they were also awakened by it. So there are joys and sorrows living in a large urban metropolitan area with a lot of diversity and a fairly progressive population. Anyway, so today what I wanted to hit you guys up with, I was going to interview a friend and amazing person today, but we rescheduled that for later in this week, and we're going to talk about a lot of things relating to healthcare violence, managing mental illness as a disease rather than a criminal activity, and how to train and cooperate with law enforcement in those activities. I think that's going to be a great episode, so stay tuned later in the week. We haven't nailed down the exact time, but it's coming soon. But what I wanted to do is talk about some stuff that's been going on in the news, go through your... Hey, look at that handsome fella. Go through some of your comments and kind of tidy up the week and kind of put it in perspective as I see it, and kind of go from there. But first... let's start with some of your comments. Mary Eklund says, hey, from Galveston, Texas. Now, Galveston is a great, beautiful place when you guys aren't getting pounded by hurricanes, which is all I remember in the news about Galveston, although I hear it's a beautiful place. And Michelle Arroyo says, the Silence No More Foundation is really making some strides, but we need more, and that's about healthcare violence. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Now, what I want to talk about is, first, I want to talk about little Charlie Gard in the UK. Now, first of all, rest in peace, and thoughts go out to his family. But I want to also say thoughts go out to everybody who cared for him at the hospital in London, where he was a patient for so many months, and Greater Ormond, I believe it was. And we first did a piece on this that was sponsored by Audible, and it was a discussion about the ethics around this case. And we sort of played up a bit the sort of tension between the U.S. conception of healthcare and the UK conception. And, is this a socialized medicine tyranny making decisions for the child and this and that? And it's interesting, a lot of the commenters thought that was really the dichotomy. But really, I think it was more a question of something that's very familiar to us in healthcare, which is a child whose condition is clearly terminal, who suffered some tremendous brain damage, whose frontline healthcare providers felt that at this point we were doing things to him instead of for him, but the parents had a different conception. And there was the eternal tension between the parents' feelings of what is right for their child and what is worth trying and when do you stop, and the care teams. And as it sort of progressed, I got a lot of messages from people in the UK who were like, really wanting us to focus a bit more on that dichotomy, and that the people who were taking care of him were getting death threats, were getting hostility from the press and from others and from the population because of the press's portrayal of how the Charlie Gard case happened, and the idea that these physicians and nurses and healthcare people at the hospital were not letting the family do these things. And to some extent that was true, because they had to end up appealing to the courts because they felt, well, first of all, this was a feudal situation. That was the feeling of the care team. And again, we are not there. And one of the big disadvantages of being the care team is, due to privacy and stuff, you can't easily publicly talk about these things, whereas the family can certainly do that. And so there was a little bit of asymmetry there. But the feeling was that this was not a case that could be helped. And I shared without causing potential suffering to the child more, right? And who knows what it was actually going on, because we weren't there, right? And I think everybody at this point became an armchair pediatrician or critical care doc or nurse. And the article I posted today was from WBUR in Boston, and it was entitled "Medical Ethics in the Charlie Gard Case. Listen to the Nurses," and it was written by a medical ethicist, and it really sort of focused on, if you haven't changed a dressing or taken care of this child yourself, it's really hard to play armchair quarterback here. And we need to stop with the hostility to the care team and understand that they're doing their best to do the right thing for the child and the parents, and weighing all these things. And it got really difficult when, the U.S. neurologist said, oh, we can do something. And then later it came out that maybe he had some financial motivation for that, because he had an investment stake in the company that was promoting this particular treatment. I don't know the exact details, so I don't want to get too into that. But there's always sort of motivations on everyone's part, and some of them are to help the child, and others are a little bit more vague, and it's hard to know. So one motivation that it's hard to ignore is that the frontline nurses taking care of Charlie Gard and the doctors taking care of Charlie Gard were most likely motivated to do the right thing for Charlie Gard. And you can argue this back and forth, but really what I want to say today is, and this is a little bit of my editorialization on Saturday, summing up the week, is I wholeheartedly support the team at Greater Ormond Hospital who took care of Charlie Gard, and my heart and thoughts go out to them, having suffered through this ordeal with the family and with Charlie. And obviously his loss is felt by his parents, and our hearts go out to them, and they've been through an incredible ordeal, and they are doing what they think is best for their child, and we need to understand that and appreciate that and have love and compassion for that. But we also need to hold love and compassion for everyone on the front lines who was taking care of them silently, who did not have a voice in this, who did not go to the press publicly and talk about this, because they were doing their jobs on the front line. And I think that's what this article was talking about. So I'm going to read some comments that were left on the article itself first, and then get to some of your comments. In fact, Linda Lacasse here in the comments from today says, thank you for bringing the subject of how nurses and docs have to stuff our feelings when we know that prolonging care is torture, right? This is something I've had to do many times, and I try to be very transparent with families and say, at this point we're really doing things to your loved one instead of for them, and we need to talk about what we can do to make sure that the quality of the life that they have is paramount and taken care of, as opposed to the quantity, which we have to really look at what is our motivation for doing what we're doing. And it's very, very hard, and I think in this case that was the primary tension here. It wasn't a question of so much state versus individual versus, socialized medicine versus, what I like to call our wasteful medicine system, which a lot of times we do things to people instead of for people because we can. And a lot of times because we have a profit motive to do so. And so who knows where the right answer is, but my editorial is going to be, I support the frontline troops. Let's take a look some here. So Zila Mitchell, or Mikkel, I think it's a nom de plume, had the top comment on this, and it said, the baby boy that turned every single stay-at-home mom into a medical expert. Rest in peace. Let's unpack this comment, because it got 85 replies and a lot of different comments that a lot of people got very triggered back and forth on both sides of this argument. And I'm not going to read the follow-up comments, but I'm going to say it's interesting because the reason that every stay-at-home mom might have become a medical expert is that they wanted to weigh in, because if it was their child, they were using empathy and saying, if I were in their position, I would do every single thing in my power to protect my child against this, faceless medical establishment that wants to, let him die. That's how they would feel. And this is why I've often argued against empathy as a tool, because it has a narrow, focused spotlight that ignores the broader picture, and it causes us to do things that are emotional but aren't necessarily in the best interest of a broader compassion. And again, I don't know exactly what happened here, but this is the discussion that we need to have, Z-Pack, if we're on the front lines thinking about this stuff. So that was one of the comments. Then we have Janine Kemp, who said, this case was sad, but the people vilifying the doctors and nurses trying to help this baby are unconscionable. They were looking out for his best interests, not the parents, which is how it should be. I hope they can find peace. So that's another angle, now looking at the opposite side and saying, not really the opposite side of the previous comment, but the opposite side of the equation, which is they are really looking out for the child's best interest. And if that was true, they felt in their medical opinion, and they had to take it to court because it was argued back and forth. Now, one thing I want to say, an update to this, and this is why I appreciate people on the front lines in the UK who send me messages, because they help inform me, because I'm not there and I don't understand necessarily how that system works. So it's tremendously helpful. A surgeon sent me a message saying, what maybe you didn't understand in your initial talk about this was that in the UK, because there was a question of why aren't they letting him go home to die? The family is now saying, well, let us go home and let him die there. And now remember, this child is on ventilatory support and probably other support. And to take him home means you have to have home ventilatory support, which in the US, we have certainly capacity for that, and there's certainly some demand for that. But his point was that in the UK, that's not a common thing. They don't really have capacity for that. It's not something they regularly do. And so that request meant that the child would have died in transport, or as soon as you'd have to extubate him, or it would have been really a very difficult effort that might have prolonged suffering. And that is why, because I know it came up, why didn't they just let him go home? Why wouldn't they let him do that? It doesn't make sense. And that was one answer for why that might have been. So I hope that when Charlie passed, he was, he had family obviously at his side, and that the team was allowed to be there and make sure that he was as comfortable as he had the capacity to be, and that the compassion that they showed during his care continued through his death. And that's the Charlie Gard piece. Now I want to move on to another piece that is quite upsetting, and that many people responded to this week. And that was the, let me just pull it up here. Actually, let me take a couple comments from you guys, then we'll go to the next piece. But first, I want to go to a quick Facebook ad, because I'm still doing a beta with Facebook where we run ads through Facebook platform that actually target you. It's only 15 seconds. It's supposed to kind of read your mind a bit as to what your interests are, so it's always funny to see what they target to you. So sit with me for 15 seconds. We get a little income that helps us support our show, and it means a lot to us. And then we'll come back and we're going to talk about the very, very, we're going to take some comments, and we're going to talk about the very difficult case of Dr. Todd Graham in South Bend, Indiana, the doctor who was shot. He was a rehab doc, physiatrist, after he apparently refused to prescribe opioids for a new patient, and the patient's husband met him in the parking lot and killed him. So we'll come back to talk about that. Please stay with me for this quick ad and tell me what you see and whether it has anything to do with you. Oh yeah, we're back. So I got an ad, it's still playing, for LL Bean, which I'm not sure makes a lot of sense to me, because I have nothing, don't even know why am I the demographic for that? I have no idea. Let's read some comments. Jen says, what annoys me the most is that the hospital was his home, Charlie Gard's, for almost all his life. They wanted to take him to their home, but the hospital was his home. So I don't know. It's true and it's not true. He had, I think, 8 weeks of life where it wasn't diagnosed that he had this mitochondrial disease, DNA disease. And so, yes, for the rest of it, it was. So it's hard to know. And again, I never want to second guess what the family wanted because they're trying to look out for his best interest with their own emotional overlay. It's tough. But the doctors and nurses and frontline staff, listen to that bird. Sounds like a dying chicken. Maybe that's what I heard this morning. The doctors, nurses, and the frontline staff kind of can get a sense medically what's in Charlie's best interest, and it seemed like it wasn't safe to prevent suffering to send him home. At least that's the sense that we're getting. Let's see. Carrie Hinchliff, who's in the UK, the professor who said he could help Charlie didn't examine him until last week, or his scans or notes, Z-Dog, from the courts. Well, so I did understand that one of the docs did look at his scans, but didn't really physically examine him until last week. And again, like, was this doctor complicit in falsely giving hope to this family? I mean, we want our doctors to be on the leading edge of pushing stuff, but so it's hard to know. What I'd love to do is somehow get him on the show in the future and kind of talk about it, but I bet the press is hounding him off the rails, so who am I to be able to usurp the press? I'm Z-Dog MT, people. Let's get him on the show. Let's talk about it. What else have we got? Carrie got an Almond Breeze ad. Penny Lusk got a Thumb Savers ad. Now because Patricia Slape is saying because the husband was an addict. So now we're getting on to the Dr. Todd Graham piece. I'm going to pull up that piece that I posted because it got a lot of interaction on our website. Let me just grab it. Here it is. And I had titled it, and I'm sorry for the bad language, This Shit Has Gotta End, Silent No More. And the title of this article was Man Killed Doctor Over Disagreement About Opioids. Now, I've gotten many, here's Dr. Graham, thoughts go out to his family and his children and his wife, who apparently heard on social media about his shooting before they were informed by authorities, which, it's horrible and it's terrible, but this is the nature of our world now, that social media disseminates information vastly quicker than anything else. And it is actually, frankly, horrifying to think that you would learn about a loved one's death from social media before someone who's trained to deliver that news delivers it to you with actual credibility. So our hearts and thoughts go out to a colleague's family who was killed in the line of duty as I see it. So I'm going to read some of this article to you, and we're going to talk about this case because it highlights everything we've talking about with the Silent No More campaign and this idea of healthcare worker violence, and in particular, violence against pain doctors. Because remember, in Las Vegas, we had a shooting down the street from our studios in the office of a pain doctor right there that hurt some staff, and then the patient killed himself. And it was a similar thing. Patient trying to get an appointment, couldn't get an appointment same day. That was a regular patient, I think, and this was apparently a new patient whose husband, and so there's already questions of, like, was the husband diverting narcotics? Was there some mental illness in the husband? Was the husband the addict who was trying to get the narcotics? What happened? Was there some misinterpretation of the bedside manner of the doctor? Nobody knows, right, unless you're on the front lines. But I had a lot of people who work with him and who work around him who emailed me that they were just terrified, and everybody went on lockdown after the shooting happened. And again, this is not something some of us trained for, but it's not something that we signed up for. People seem to think we signed up for this sort of abuse when we're going into nursing or doctoring or whatever it is on the front lines of healthcare, and it's not. And yet here it is. Here we are trying to deal with it. So according to WNTDU-TV, Dr. Todd Graham told 48-year-old Michael Jarvis's wife on Wednesday morning that he would no longer prescribe her any opioid medication. So that this article seems to imply she was a regular patient, but I've heard both, so it's hard to know. Jarvis reportedly became upset and argued with the doctor and then left the office. Okay, so he was there. There was agitation. He returned later and confronted Graham, told two witnesses to leave, and then shot and killed the doctor. And so Commander Tim Corbett of the Metro Homicide said this was a very targeted attack. I'm a firm believer, and I think the prosecutor feels the same way, that if Jarvis would have gotten inside that building, though there wouldn't have been any specific target, it's like trapping an animal in a corner. They're going to come out fighting. I truly believe this could have escalated into a mass shooting. So, again, we have the same story. Opioids, physicians on the front lines who are actually doing the right thing, saying we cannot continue to prescribe you this, or we cannot prescribe you this medication, it's not appropriate, and then violence. And what are we going to do about this, Z-Pack? In a way, we've all collectively dug ourselves into this mess between patient satisfaction scores, between pain as a fifth vital sign, between rising patient expectations that pain needs to be managed as aggressively as possible because even a little bit of pain is not okay, to physicians being indoctrinated in their professional societies and by pharma that opioids are not addictive in patients with legitimate pain without a history of addiction. All of this stuff is now proven to be incorrect. So now we're in this mess. So how do we start to unwind it? Well, talking about it every single day is a start, but it's not an answer. This week we're going to try to talk to a colleague of mine who is going to have some thoughts on the criminalization of mental health and addiction and how we need to rethink that. And could there be ways that we can prevent this from a behavioral and an interventional standpoint before it ever escalates to this point? So de-escalation techniques, etc. I'm not saying this particular case that could have helped. I'm saying how do we prevent future cases from escalating to the level where this is happening, and meanwhile relieving our criminal justice system of a massive burden and buttressing our mental health system to take care of people who desperately need it. All right, so let's read some comments from this article because I think they'll be illustrative of how people think about this situation. Listen, you can hear the neighbors are playing the music. Hold on. I just got to show you guys this. This is what we're dealing with. Hold on. Okay, so on a volume scale of 1 to 10, that's probably a 2. Where they typically are every night is an 8. So it's that like crappy jam music blasted at like 8. And all our windows up here are open. And that's where we sleep. And then in the morning, we're greeted with the sounds of raccoons having intercourse, but they weren't raccoons. So anyways, that's neither here nor there. All right, so before I dig into these comments, let's go to another Facebook ad break. Again, we're part of a very select few, a number of creators who get to do this. It helps the show a lot, and it helps to kind of have fun to see what does Facebook think we want to see in an ad. Here we go. 15 seconds. Stay with me. What is up, Z-Pack? We're back. Thanks for watching that. Let me know what you saw. Anyway, so I'm going to read the first comment on the Todd Graham article by Terry Lohman, and this triggered a lot of people. So it said, maybe doctors could stop overprescribing. It took my brother years to get off opioids. His pain management doctor fired him as a patient because he refused to take any more drugs. If y'all didn't make so much money from pharmaceutical companies, y'all in general, not particular, would there be so many prescriptions? Just asking. And this unleashed a torrent of responses that were mostly very angry healthcare practitioners. Ray Gons, who says, what a cowardly and ignorant thing to say. Good job on not taking any responsibility for your own damn life and blaming a doctor for overprescribing. This is the single most stupidest thing I've read on Facebook today. Do everyone a favor and don't reproduce. Wow. All right, so let's look at these two. Let's look at these two comments because they're opposing ends of the spectrum of thought, and let's try to process them as non-judgmentally as we can, and as I can, sitting in the backyard with these doofuses playing loud music. I'm trying to be accepting and compassionate. As I was walking on a hike this morning, I did like a 5-mile hike through Wonderlick Park near here, which is just beautiful, redwoods, fog, and I was listening to Jack Kornfield, who's a former Buddhist monk and now a psychologist, talking about Buddhist psychology and the idea of forgiveness and compassion, and I'm trying to live that in my life, but it's hard when you're pissed off all the time. So let's look at these two comments. Terry's comment, which is clearly comes from a place of injury and hurt, where her brother was addicted to narcotics, and she put the blame on overprescribing and the pain doctor, and said the story was that he was trying to get off drugs, and he was fired because he wouldn't get off drugs. Now, this is tricky. Because yes, overprescribing was and is a huge problem. And yes, the clinicians are part of the problem. But once the addiction is that deep, it's not often that I see that it's a patient trying to get off the drugs. It's more that they want escalation of drugs when they're fired by their pain management specialist, or there's other sort of procurement or doctor shopping or other behavior going on that's part of the addictive process that leads to their dismissal from the clinic. So I can see why doctors and healthcare providers got very triggered by this. Now, at the same time, we need to have some compassion for what she's saying, which is, in a way, yes, her brother was a victim as well of this. And if you see addiction as a disease model, which I do, I will take a stand on that, then we have to figure out a way to treat him. And everybody wants to blame somebody else, but honestly, this is probably now beyond blame, right? It's bigger than that. Now, when Ray was talking about it being a cowardly and ignorant thing to say, I think he was feeling the physician or clinician perspective, which is, it seems like so many of these patients want to externalize blame for their own lives. And many family members feel this about their addicted family members. Like, they're always blaming someone else, but they're not taking the responsibility for decisions that they have made. And I think in many ways that's also valid. Now, I have a lot of sort of quibbles with the concept of free will and whether it really exists, and we'll talk about that another time. But regardless of that, I think holding people accountable, whether or not you believe they're making decisions volitionally, holding people accountable is an important part of behavioral modification and promoting a civil society in general. So I'll agree with that piece of it. Now, I think as far as cowardly and ignorant, I'm not sure I would describe her comment as that. I would say it can feel that way to someone who feels attacked by a comment like that. So, those are two sides, again, of this idea. Now, again, when you make a comment like that on a article about a doctor who was shot by a patient, it's hard not to get triggered as a doctor and say, no one deserves that, and this guy was trying to do the right thing, and by all accounts, from what I hear so far, a pretty upstanding guy. I think he was from Athens, Georgia, trained at Northwestern, was well respected within his practice. So even if that wasn't true, should you be shot by a patient? So this is tough. It's a tough discussion. I'm glad we're having it, but it is very hard. So let's read some of your current comments, because I want to get your voice in right now on this Saturday. Let me pull that up. Here we go. There we are, live and direct. Live-ish and direct. Jen Walters, disagree with you on that one, Z-Dog. Thank you, Jen. I'm glad you do. You choose to take an illegal drug knowing what it does. Addiction isn't a disease. It's poor life choices. Okay. I will respectfully disagree on that. I say, yes, choice is a part of it, but, and again, I'm going to try not to talk about free will too much, but let's just say this. Let's look at it a different way. How far has our behavioral morality play on addiction gone to help us? Not very far. So we are still in a mess. We still moralize about addiction as a moral failing or a character flaw or a personal choice. But it has done nothing to reduce the opioid epidemic, or has the war on drugs been successful? No, because I think part of our problem is we're intuitively wired to see it as a moral failing. It actually works societally for keeping order, but does it work scientifically? I would argue no. I would argue you can see brain changes in addicts. Yes, the first choice to try a drug, right. But how many of us are risk-taking genetically and would do that? I've tried drugs. Turns out I'm not an addict. Did I not have the physiology to become an addict? Did I have better upbringing in terms of expectations from my family? Did I have the genes and environment together that prevented me from becoming an addict? Probably all of the above. Was any of that my choice? Very little of it. So it's tough, but I'm sympathetic, Jen, with what you're saying, because I think we do need accountability, and we need to hold people accountable, because I think that also helps modify behavior to some extent. But I think the disease model is what is going to ultimately extract us from this, not necessarily the moral failure model. Thank you for your comment. Laurel Berg actually exposits on this a bit. Free will, quote unquote, ceases to exist when we're under the effects of opioids. A slippery slope, but there are people with miserable lives who get by on as little of the crap as possible. So people talking about using, opioids judiciously for chronic pain and that kind of things, but the idea that free will ceases to exist under the effect of opioids is something that almost anybody who has been an addict would attest to. And I've talked to a lot of addicts, and they would agree with this, that you're just not, your brain is operating on some kind of autopilot that is trying to procure the medication, and you have behavior and exhibit behavior that you're not even conscious you're exhibiting. And, again, ultimately humans are these glorious creatures, but we're driven by these kind of conditioned, intuitive behaviors that are our primitive brain, and a lot of that is unconscious to us and automatic, and again, the result of prior causes, genetics, environment, what we ate for lunch, all those things that aren't a choice, really. So Lauren Mills backs up again, no one deserves to be murdered, of course. Tess Dunaway, Z, we need withdrawal protocols when taking people off these drugs, assessing the level of addiction. People are at different levels. I agree. And actually, Catherine Travnicek, who's been on our show, has talked about this. How do you meet a person? She's a pain specialist, and I think she's watching right now. How do you address a person's level of dependence, pain, addiction, where they are, and design a program that's designed for them? It's all unique to the patient. There is no one-size-fits-all, just like with nutrition, as we've been talking with our last few guests. Mary Hammock, the first time you take an illegal substance is a poor life choice. Mary Hammock. All right, so Mary, let me play counterpoint to that, and I appreciate your comment. When I was in college, I tried marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, ecstasy. Each of those drugs, when I tried them in college, was an experimentation in what it does to my state of consciousness and my mind. And in that state of mind where I was then, I learned quite a bit about myself, my mind, my own proclivities, having tried those drugs, once or twice. Were those poor choices for me? I would say they changed my life for the better, because I had an understanding of different states of awareness that I never would have had I not tried those drugs. Am I advocating everybody do this? No. Am I advocating breaking the law? No. Am I saying that as a college student I made those choices? Yes. Do I regret them? Absolutely not. Actually, Sam Harris, who's one of my intellectual idols, has talked about this exact facet. What would he do if his kids asked him about psychedelics, which he also did in college, hasn't done for 20 years or however old he is now, 40-something, almost 50. So, he says, listen to these guys. You see what I'm talking about? Can you hear it? Talk about drugs. Like, they're probably tripping on acid right now if they're listening to that crap. But, those decisions actually, as Sam Harris said, if his, daughter ultimately grew up and said she wanted to try that, he would actually feel like that's a particular rite of passage for her. And I think everybody's different about this, and this can lead to a lot of butt hurt, but my feeling is we should be studying particular psychedelics. Now, the first time you try heroin, probably a really bad decision, because there's enough evidence in literature and conditioning in the cultural psyche that is a very bad thing to do, right? So it's really a matter of degree and a matter of why are these drugs illegal in the first place, And again, I'll tell you where my elephant here is on this. I'm a bit of a libertarian, and I think these drugs should be decriminalized at the minimum, as they do in Portugal, as a better approach, a more successful approach than what we're actually seeing happening here in the U.S., which has not been successful. Other comments? Oh, they turned it off for a second. Thank God. Our society has expectations that are unrealistic in regards to pain, says Sarah Gore. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We have one magic bullet expectations that a pill will make us better and we should have zero pain. And this is completely unacceptable. There they go again. It's completely unacceptable. Let's see. Teresa Diggs. Obviously, anyone that thinks opioids are always a life choice have never been in chronic pain. So I think we should distinguish, Teresa, between people who use the drugs recreationally or people who are legitimately using these drugs to treat an otherwise untreatable chronic syndrome or acute pain syndrome, right? So they obviously, opioids have uses. We can't deny that. Francie Darnell says what I believe, actually. Environment is not a choice. Genetics aren't a choice. Have compassion. I feel like we should have compassion for people where they are. People are in the situation they're in, often due to prior causes that are beyond their control. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go full liberal social justice and try to accept every single decision people make. No, I think you still have to hold people deeply accountable for decisions, and that in itself is an environment that you create that guides human behavior. So let me rewind that and unpack that statement, because I think it's important. At least I do, because I'm full of myself. Holding people accountable for decisions, even if you deeply believe, as I do, that free will is a bit of an illusion and that many choices are made because of prior causes like genetics, environment, neural wiring, whatever, what have you, still holding them accountable as if free will is theirs is a crucial part of the environmental pressure on an organism to behave in a way that we as a society feel they should behave. So if we think injecting heroin into your child, say, let's just use a crazy example, is a bad idea, and somebody does it, and you can say, well, they don't have free will, and they're the result of prior causes, and they were injected with heroin when they were a child, and so therefore they're going to do it to their child, and so excuse them. Okay, that may be scientifically accurate, but it is not a way to modify the behavior. You have to say, no, that person gets arrested, the child gets removed from them, they go to jail, and there's rehabilitation and all the other stuff that happens, right? You can do it as compassionately as you can, but you still have to do it. Without that environmental pressure, then that life could be allowed to unfold in a way that is going to destroy not only that person's life, but the very fabric of the society that needs to be intact to allow us to succeed as a race, as a human race. So that's my thinking on that in a nutshell. You can agree or disagree. To take some more comments on that. Tracy Johnson, your neighbors just want to be famous, dude. I don't think they have any idea who I am, because if they did, they would stop being complete assholes. So part of me hopes they'll listen to what I'm saying, but I doubt it. Francie Darnell, I think John Kabat-Zinn was ahead of his time. I agree. We'll talk about John Kabat-Zinn another time. I think he was and is ahead of his time. What do we got? Kayla Schulte, separate the judgment from the treatment. Is that a fair summary? I think that's a fair offshoot of what I'm saying, Kayla. But it's not an entire summary of what I'm saying. Let's see. Yeah, these comments are great. Mark O'Donnell. I don't blame people for their mistakes, but I do ask that they pay for them. Jurassic Park. I like that. That's actually great. I like that. Because by asking people to pay and take responsibility for their mistakes, first of all, we hold societal accountability. And remember, we are a human race that evolved to work in tribal societal groups, to be accountable to each other. Not only that, we evolved a big cortex to keep score, to keep track of what everybody's doing within the tribe. Did you do me a favor? Golden Rule says I'll do you a favor. Did you misbehave and hurt somebody? Golden Rule says we're going to remember that as a tribe. And it allows for in-group cohesion. Where it can get out of control, this kind of accountability and moralization, is where now you have multiple different tribes living in the same city, the same country. You have a diversity of tribes. And the in-group, out-group mentality of morality becomes problematic for a diverse society, which is why I will argue, and others will argue, a place like the Bay Area, where you have multiple different races and cultures packed in tightly in a very expensive rat race, they tend to be pretty liberal because they value the morality of inclusion, fairness, and justice. Now, go to a place with a lot more space, like a Las Vegas or a Texas, and the values of sanctity, of respect for authority, of loyalty, as well as fairness and those kind of things, those come into play, which tend to emerge more commonly a conservative mindset. Now, when we can look at the world in terms of that way of looking at things, we get less judgy about, oh my God, that guy's liberal, or oh my God, that guy's a conservative, I can't even talk to him, and go, oh no, that person's politics are the perfect emergent for their environment or their upbringing or even their predispositions and genetics. They happen to be a person who really likes to stick a middle finger to authority, like my neighbors, because they love to play loud, crappy music, right? So they're that guy. Well, they're much more likely to, in college, even if they were raised as a conservative, they're more likely to sympathize with a more liberal strain of thought, right? Whereas, and this has been studied, people who are more, it's interesting, you can actually look at their dorm rooms, kind of neat freaks, kind of clean, a little more obsessed with being on time and things like that, tend to have a predisposition to the more conservative strains of thought. And this isn't, again, not to typecast everybody, but you can actually study this stuff and see it emerge, right? So a lot of it, again, even the choice of politics is beyond our really rational, conscious control in many cases. But does that mean we shouldn't talk about opposing ideas? Does that mean we shouldn't expose a conservative to liberal ideas and a liberal to conservative ideas? No. In fact, the opposite. It means we should, because it allows then a little bit of modification, compassion, and understanding of the other side, as well as being open to ideas. All right, so on that note, I think I'm going to wrap it up. I've been pontificating on the floor of the deck of my backyard in a NASA shirt, and I think I'm going to end this by playing us out with a little really crappy music that my neighbors insist on playing at the top of their frickin' lungs. I want to kill myself, guys, but I also want to accept my neighbors for the fish listening douchebags that they are. I'm kidding. Love thy neighbor. The golden rule. ZDoggMT, we're out. Peace.